Now, you gonna come peaceful like, or do I have to use my amazing powers of kung fu?
In the fall of 1974, a mild-mannered janitor with no real fighting ability, a cat who did all the actual work, and a filing cabinet that he kept getting stuck in became one of the most beloved characters in Saturday morning television. The show lasted one season, 16 episodes, and somehow, against every reasonable expectation, it became a touchstone for anyone who grew up watching cartoons in the 1970s. This is the story of Hong Kong Phooey, 1974. How the 70s cartoon classic was forgotten. The world that made Hong Kong Phooey possible. To understand why Hong Kong Phooey exists, you have to understand what was happening in American popular culture in the early 1970s. Bruce Lee had arrived. Fists of Fury, the American release of The Big Boss, came out in 1973. Enter the Dragon, his most globally successful film, was released in July 1973, just weeks before Lee died suddenly of cerebral edema at age 32. His death, rather than diminishing his cultural impact, seemed to amplify it. The mystery of what might have been and the spectacle of what actually was combined to make martial arts an American obsession. Kung Fu, the television series starring David Carradine as a Shaolin monk wandering the American West, premiered on ABC in October 1972 and ran until 1975.
Kung Fu was so highly valued in the Orient that for centuries, the Sifus,
the theme of one person using discipline, philosophy, and physical skill to navigate a world that misunderstood them, resonated with American audiences in ways that straight action shows couldn't quite achieve. Kung Fu movies were packing theaters, Bruce Lee posters were on bedroom walls, Hanna-Barbera productions, which had spent the previous decade and a half dominating Saturday morning television with shows like The Flintstones, The Jetsons, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, and Huckleberry Hound, was not the studio to let a trend pass by without addressing it. They were responsive to popular culture in a way that made them commercially reliable, even if the resulting shows sometimes had the feeling of something assembled at speed to catch a wave before it broke. They had already made Devlin.
And now, Ernie Devlin!
Loosely inspired by Evel Knievel and Jabberjaw, which arrived on the coattails of Jaws. The Kung Fu wave was exactly the kind of cultural moment they were built to respond to. Hong Kong Phooey was developed by Joe Ruby and Ken Spears, two writers who had already co-created Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? In 1969, making them responsible for one of the most enduring Saturday morning properties in television history before they even got to Hong Kong Phooey. They conceived of a character who would take the martial arts craze and turn it into self-aware comedy, a superhero who genuinely believed in his own abilities, while his pet cat quietly handled every actual crisis. During development, the show briefly had two different names.
Any super magnificent crime fighter would have done the same thing.
At one point, the main character was considered to be Huckleberry Hound, an existing Hanna-Barbera property. This idea was abandoned in favor of creating an original character. The show also operated under the working title Kung Phooey before settling on Hong Kong Phooey for the final production. In the early stages, the studio considered using a more traditional voice actor who could approximate an Asian accent, a common and problematic approach in American entertainment of the era. What happened instead changed the show's character entirely. Scatman Crothers and the casting that made the show. The story of how Scatman Crothers became the voice of Hong Kong Phooey is one of the best behind-the-scenes stories in Hanna-Barbera's history, and it involves executive producer Joseph Barbera, making a casting choice that he apparently wasn't sure the ABC network would accept.
You mean, that's right, Honcho.
Benjamin Sherman Scatman Crothers was, by 1974, one of the most versatile performers in the entertainment industry. He was a jazz musician, a singer, a guitarist, a ukulele player, a dancer, a comedian, and an actor. He was born in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1910 and had spent decades working in every corner of the entertainment business before voice work became a significant part of his career. He had voiced Meadowlark in the CBS Harlem Globetrotters animated series in 1971, and he had provided the voice of the Cheshire Cat for an album version of Alice in Wonderland in 1966 that apparently impressed Joseph Barbera enough to keep him in mind.
I'm gonna let you watch your favorite superhero in action.
According to a story that Barbera repeated in interviews, and that has been confirmed through Television Academy materials, when it came time to cast Hong Kong Phooey, Barbera auditioned multiple performers and then presented clips to ABC executives without identifying who had provided each voice. He let the network choose based purely on what they heard. They chose Crothers. Only then did Barbera reveal that his chosen voice actor was a black man. Barbera's reasoning for this approach, as he explained it, was that he didn't think the network would approve a black performer in the lead role, and he wanted to ensure that the decision was made on merit before the network could raise objections. Whether this account is entirely accurate or partially embellished by the passage of years is difficult to verify, but it has been reported consistently and is supported by the Television Academy interview material.
If you're Sergeant Flint, who's that fella I left guard the safe?
What's not disputed is the outcome. Scatman Crothers became the voice of Hong Kong Phooey, and he became, as animation historian Greg Ehrbar has noted, the first African-American to play the lead in an animated television series. That is a fact worth sitting with for a moment. 1974, the first black man to lead an animated series, and the character he was voicing was an anthropomorphic dog who mostly got rescued by a cat. Crothers brought something to Hong Kong Phooey that no amount of directorial instruction could have manufactured. His natural timing, his warmth, his willingness to make the character genuinely funny rather than just animated, his ability to make a bumbling cartoon dog feel like someone you genuinely liked. All of it came from decades of experience performing in clubs and concert halls and anywhere else that required a performer to connect with an audience in real time. His co-workers remember him fondly. Kathy Gorey, who provided voice work on several Hanna-Barbera productions of the period, recalled that during recording breaks, Crothers would bring his ukulele, and the cast and crew would gather in the parking lot while he played. Scatman was a really sweet and generous guy, she said in later interviews. Crothers had an unusually wide range for a voice actor. He could play cool, he could play flustered, he could play confident, he could play baffled, and he could move between all of these within the same episode
That cotton-picking pocket picker will never escape.
without ever losing the essential warmth that made Penry Pooch likable despite his complete uselessness as a crime fighter. The character could have been played as an object of ridicule. Crothers played him as the hero of his own story, and the difference is everything. How the show actually worked. Hong Kong Phooey ran from September 7th, 1974 to December 21st, 1974 on ABC's Saturday morning block. 16 episodes were produced, almost all of which contained 2 separate shorter stories. The final episode, Comedy Cowboys, was structured as a backdoor pilot for new characters, Honcho, the Mystery Maverick, and the Posse Impossible, who would later appear in their own segment on the CB Bears show. The premise was a sustained and affectionate parody of the superhero genre. the martial arts genre, and the police procedural, all simultaneously. Penrod Penry Pooch is a janitor at an unnamed city's police station. He works under the constant low-grade contempt of Sergeant Flint, voiced by Joe E. Ross, who had played Officer Gunther Tootie on Car 54, Where Are You? In the early 1960s, and brought the same exasperated bellowing quality to Flint that he'd used throughout his television career. Flint doesn't particularly like Penry, doesn't notice anything unusual about him, and would be unlikely to appreciate the irony if he did. Rosemary, the police telephone operator, has a substantial crush on Hong Kong Phooey without making the connection that he and the janitor she works alongside every day are the same person. This is a joke the show commits to completely and plays entirely straight.
Shoes are faster than that crocodile's feet.
When a crime is reported, Penry runs to a filing cabinet, jumps inside, gets stuck every single time, and is freed by Spot, his pet cat, who is striped and possessed of considerably more competence than his owner. Once transformed into Hong Kong Phooey, Penry consults his copy of the Hong Kong Book of Kung Fu, a kind of correspondence course in martial arts that he believes makes him capable and that the show treats as wildly inadequate for every situation he encounters. The Phooey-mobile, a vehicle that can transform into a boat, a plane, or a telephone booth depending on circumstances, adds another layer of silliness to the already well-established absurdity. The running joke of the series, executed with considerable consistency, is that Hong Kong Phooey almost never actually solves the crime through his own actions.
He's too embarrassed to thank me for being so efficient.
Spot handles it. Phooey, through some combination of luck, chaos, and accidental intervention, ends up positioned as the hero when the dust settles. He accepts the credit with complete sincerity. Spot doesn't complain. Don Messick, one of the most prolific voice actors in Hanna-Barbera's history, the voice of Scooby-Doo, Bam Bam Rubble, and dozens of other characters, provided the voice of Spot and the narrator. The supporting villain cast changed with each episode, giving the show variety within its fairly rigid structural formula. The theme song was written and composed by Hoyt Curtin, William Hanna, and Joseph Barbera, and sung by Crothers himself. It calls Phooey quicker than the human eye and #1 super guy, a description the show then spends every episode cheerfully disproving.
Well, good to be back at police headquarters.
The voice cast beyond Crothers and Ross was deep with Hanna-Barbera veterans. Don Messick, who voiced Scooby-Doo, Bam Bam Rubble, and dozens of other characters over his career, provided the voice of Spot and the narrator. Dawes Butler, Hal Smith, Gene Vanderpyle, Janet Waldo, Casey Kasem, and other staples of the Hanna-Barbera roster filled in the various villain and supporting roles across the 16 episodes. A viewer who had grown up with Hanna-Barbera cartoons would recognize many of the voices even when they didn't recognize the specific characters, which gave the show a certain built-in familiarity despite its new setting and premise. The episode titles give a flavor of what was on offer: the Giggler, the Abominable Snowman, Dr. Deschizo, the Incredible Mr. Shrink, Mr. Tornado, the Claw,
Disappeared with him.
And right in the middle of the economy drive. Ooh.
Each week brought a new colorfully named villain and a new situation in which Hong Kong Phooey would fail to handle it adequately, while Spot quietly handled it adequately. The formula was consistent enough to become comfortable and varied enough to avoid feeling repetitive across its relatively brief run. What the show got right. For something produced under the time and budget constraints of 1970s Saturday morning television, Hong Kong Phooey got a surprising number of things right. The self-awareness was genuine. The show was not under any illusion that its hero was actually competent, and the comedy came from the gap between Phooey's absolute confidence and his actual performance. This is a comedic structure. the oblivious bumbler surrounded by more capable people
I know you're frustrated because you don't have kung fu paws like me.
who quietly manage consequences. That has ancient roots and tends to work because it's grounded in recognizable human experience. We all know people who are completely certain of their abilities and somewhat less reliable in execution. The martial arts parody was affectionate rather than dismissive. The show wasn't mocking kung fu as a concept. It was placing a specifically incompetent practitioner in the center of a genre that required competent ones and letting the comedy grow from that mismatch. This is different from the kind of mockery that comes from contempt, and an audience in 1974 could feel the distinction. The show loved the genre it was playing in, even as it was making fun of it. Crothers' performance elevated material that might otherwise have been adequate into something memorable.
Oh, now, what good are mere muscles against the fearless forces of Hong Kong Phooey?
The combination of his specific comedic sensibility, warm, self-amused, quick, with a character who was genuinely lovable despite his total incompetence gave the show a heart that many of its contemporaries lacked. 16 episodes is a limited run, but Crothers made every episode feel inhabited rather than just animated. There was also a quiet dignity to the casting and to the characterization. Hong Kong Phooey, despite his bumbling, is never a figure of contempt. He is respected within the fiction of the show, loved by Rosemary, tolerated by Sarge, and allowed the pride of his heroic identity even when it's entirely unearned. Phooey gets to be the hero of his own story, which in 1974, with Scatman Crothers providing the voice.
Get just like this one.
Yep, and I want it fast.
Was that fast enough, Governor?
Carried a weight that went beyond the Saturday morning context. Compare this to the broader landscape of how characters who looked or sounded different from the dominant white American mainstream were typically represented in animation of the period. Stereotyping was endemic. Accents were deployed for cheap laughs. Characters were defined primarily by their otherness. Hong Kong Phooey was playing with those conventions. The name, the martial arts setting, the trappings of the kung fu genre, but the actual character at the center of the show was warm, confident, lovable, and voiced by a performer who brought genuine humanity to a cartoon dog. It is more nuanced than the show gets credit for being.
And a rinky-dinky-doo to you. I'm that superhero, strong and wise.
Particularly from a 50-year distance. The show's life after 1974, 16 episodes, 1 season, and then the show effectively ended, except that in practice, Hong Kong Phooey never quite disappeared. The original episodes aired from September 7th to December the 21st, 1974. They then ran in repeats until 1976. The show returned to the air in reruns in 1978 and again in 1981. Through the 1980s, Hong Kong Phooey was a fixture of the USA Network's Cartoon Express programming block, which meant that an entire second generation of children watched reruns of a show that had originally aired before many of them were born. This is why people who grew up in the early 1980s remember Hong Kong Phooey as vividly as those who watched the original 1974 broadcasts.
You just made a big mistake, officer. Why would the great Hong Kong Phooey hijack an armored truck?
And why some of them assumed it was a much longer show than it actually was. Scatman Crothers reprised his role as Penry/Hong Kong Phooey in Laugh Olympics, the 1977 Hanna-Barbera animated competition series where Phooey appeared as a member of the Scooby-Doobies team alongside characters from across Hanna-Barbera's 1970s catalog. The character remained in the rotation of Hanna-Barbera's active properties through the 1970s and into the 1980s in a way that kept him visible even without new episodes being produced. Crothers himself went on to considerable acclaim beyond his voice work. He played Dick Halloran in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in 1980, appearing opposite Jack Nicholson in one of the most celebrated horror films ever made.
Been tricked. Grandma Goody is a grandpa.
A performance in a very different register from anything he'd done for Hanna-Barbera. He voiced Jazz, the smooth-talking Autobot, in the original Transformers animated series beginning in 1984. There is something quietly satisfying about the fact that the voice behind Hong Kong Phooey and the voice behind Jazz are the same person. Scatman Crothers lending his particular quality of cool warmth to animated characters across a decade. Scatman Crothers died on November 22, 1986, at the age of 76, leaving behind a body of work that extended across 6 decades and essentially every medium available to an entertainer. The show received its DVD release on August 15, 2006.
I reckon it's up to one of us ordinary folks to take over.
When Warner Home Video put out the complete series in a 2-disc Region 1 set. For fans who had been waiting for a legitimate home release through VHS, Laserdisc, and the early DVD years without one, this was a long overdue arrival. In 1990, a Hong Kong Phooey video game had been released for the Sega Master System and Game Gear under the title Hong Kong Phooey. Number 1 Super Guy, keeping the character in public awareness through the gaming market. The film that never happened. One of the stranger chapters in the Hong Kong Phooey story involves a live-action / CGI hybrid film that was announced, developed, leaked, and ultimately abandoned over the course of several years. The project was first announced in 2009.
Is there an electrician in the house?
With David A. Goodman hired to write the screenplay. Alex Zam was attached to direct. The production was backed by Alcon Entertainment, and he involved producers Brett Ratner, Broderick Johnson, Andrew Kosovi, and Jay Stern. In August 2011, it was announced that Eddie Murphy had been cast to provide the voice of Penry / Hong Kong Phooey. Murphy's casting made a certain kind of sense. He was a significant comedic talent with voice work experience. His cultural profile matched the character's playful energy, and continuing the tradition of prominent black performers voicing Hong Kong Phooey was a meaningful choice. The project moved forward through development, and test footage was produced. On December 28, 2012, that test footage was leaked online. The clip showed a CGI version of Hong Kong Phooey in action, interacting with live-action environments, and gave the public its clearest look at what the film would have been.
Congratulations, Hong Kong Phooey. You've cracked the case.
The response from fans was mixed. Some were intrigued. Others were skeptical of the CGI approach for a character whose charm was inseparable from the limited but warm animation of the original Hanna-Barbera style. The film was never made. There was no official announcement of cancellation. The project simply stopped moving forward. No release date was set. No further casting announcements followed. By 2014, the window during which the film might have appeared had clearly passed without anything materializing. What happened behind the scenes? Whether it was script problems, studio budget decisions,
He think he do. Now it's off to catch them penthouse crooks.
Murphy's schedule, or some combination of these factors, was never publicly explained in detail. The Eddie Murphy Hong Kong Phooey film joins a long list of announced but unmade Hanna-Barbera adaptations that includes a Snagglepuss feature film, a Johnny Quest movie that went through multiple attempts across different studios, and various other animated properties that studios optioned and then couldn't get across the finish line. Some ideas are better as memories than they are as modern live-action productions, and the Hong Kong Phooey film's failure to arrive may have spared the original show's reputation more than it damaged it. Why it was forgotten, and why it wasn't. The question built into this video's title is worth actually answering. Was Hong Kong Phooey really forgotten? The honest answer is sort of, and not entirely.
Why, it worked! You know the powers of Kung Fu just never cease to amaze me.
Among the generation that grew up watching the original 1974 broadcast and the USA Network reruns of the 1980s, Hong Kong Phooey is vivid. The theme song is immediately recognizable to anyone who heard it at age 6 or 8. Penry's filing cabinet, Spot doing all the work, the Phooey-mobile transforming into a telephone booth when it needed to be a telephone booth. These things are lodged in the memory of a generation with the particular tenacity that Saturday morning cartoons had. They occupied a specific slice of the week, at a specific time, in a specific ritual of pajamas and cereal, and that context gave them a power that primetime viewing rarely produced. But among generations who didn't grow up with those specific reruns,
Instead of maximum momentum, I got maximum exhaustion.
Hong Kong Phooey is largely unknown. The show's brief original run, 1 season, 16 episodes, means it doesn't have the cultural mass that a 5-year run would have produced. Scooby-Doo ran for decades in various forms and is known to every generation. The Flintstones produced feature films and reboots. Hong Kong Phooey produced 16 episodes and a leaked test reel. The cultural conversation around racial representation in media has also made the show complicated to revive without significant reconsideration. The character's name, his trappings, and the broader context of how Asian cultures were depicted in 1970s American entertainment are all part of the picture.
There they go, after them. There's no door on this side of the building.
This doesn't mean the show has nothing to offer. The actual humor, the character dynamics, and especially Crothers' performance remain genuinely funny and warm. But it does mean that a straightforward nostalgic revival would require more thought than a simple rebranding. It's worth noting that every subsequent performer who has voiced Hong Kong Phooey in official productions, including the 2001 Flash animation web series produced for CartoonNetwork.com, in which Penry appeared with the same design, while Hong Kong Phooey was reimagined as a more competent fighter, has been a black performer. This represents a consistent and deliberate choice by the people steward of the character, honoring the precedent that Crothers established in 1974.
Our meek little janitor can turn into the greatest crime fighter of all time.
Whether that precedent is ever revived in a major new production depends on what the entertainment industry decides to do with a property that sits at the intersection of genuine nostalgia and genuine complexity. The show's most significant ongoing legacy may be the historical fact of Scatman Crothers' casting. That milestone, the first black performer to lead an animated television series, is not well known enough, and the story of how Barbera achieved it by presenting anonymous clips to ABC executives before revealing the performer's identity deserves wider recognition as a moment in both animation history and the broader history of American television representation. What Hong Kong Phooey ultimately left behind is not a franchise, not a reboot, not a film series, and not a particularly long chapter in the history of animation.
Direct hit on the Hong Kong ding dong.
It left behind 16 episodes of genuinely funny, warmly performed, self-aware cartoon comedy, and the memory of a specific kind of Saturday morning that anyone who was there in 1974 or who caught the USA Network reruns on a weekend morning in 1983 can probably still feel. 16 episodes, 1 season, 1 filing cabinet that he always got stuck in, 1 cat who quietly handled everything, and 1 voice actor who made a bumbling cartoon dog feel like someone worth cheering for. Hong Kong Phooey didn't conquer television. It just showed up, did something charming and funny for 1 season, and then mostly let the reruns carry it forward. The cartoon deserved more episodes than it got, Scatman Crothers deserved more recognition for what he achieved with that role, and the story of how that casting came to be deserved to be told more widely than it has been. If this brought back a memory, or if you're discovering it for the first time and wondering where to find it, hit the like button and subscribe. We cover the shows, the characters, and the moments that defined what Saturday morning television was. More coming. See you next time.